Hello, hello. It's Eileen here, and I've got a quick update that I wanted to be sure to share with you before we dive into today's episode. The Resilience Room membership community is going to open its doors for new members Monday, July 28th through Friday, August 1st. If you've been thinking of joining us and want to be sure to be notified when we open, I want to encourage you to join the waitlist. You can do that at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. That's go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. We only open our doors for new members a few times per year, so if you've been thinking about joining, this is a great time for you to do that. We would love nothing more than to welcome you into our amazing community. So again, you can find all the details and join the waitlist at go.eileendivine.com/resilience room. Okay, on to the episode. That's why we see kids who may start out strong at the beginning of the school year, where they can go to school the whole day. Maybe they get through the day without even having any behavioral symptoms, and they've been able to string together several on days or maybe even on weeks in a row. So they're not given any accommodations because nobody is seeing that they are barely surviving their day, working harder than any other student in this case around them. But as the year progresses, that cognitive load and fatigue builds. And what they were able to do at the beginning of the school year, it's just not possible anymore. They need more support. And so those on days turn into off days. Hi there, and welcome to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and I am a therapist, parent coach, and educator who supports parents that are raising children, teens, and young adults with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. If you are a parent or caregiver of a child who has intense, confusing, relentless, or sometimes even scary behaviors, you are in the right place, and I am so glad you're here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting Podcast. I am your host, Eileen Devine. And if you have been listening to this podcast, or maybe you follow me on social media, you know that my work is entirely focused on supporting parents, just like you, who have kids with brain-based differences and challenging behavioral symptoms. And in my work with these incredible parents, as you can probably imagine, there is overlap in the situations they describe to me. And if your experience is anything like theirs, which I imagine it is, my guess is you can relate to what we're going to be talking about today, which is when our kids experience on and off days, how this looks, why it happens, and what it has to do with their brain. My guess is that you found yourself pretty frustrated at times with your child or your teen because there are seemingly simple skills or tasks that you've been working on with them for a long time, maybe years. They finally get it. They're consistently doing it, whatever it is, independently. And you think, well, thank goodness we are finally past me needing to help them with this every single day, right? But then all of a sudden, it's like those abilities disappear overnight. Not completely, maybe, but there is a significant regression. And your child or your teen is back to needing your full support. That can be really hard and really discouraging as a parent. My guess is that you are probably finding yourself thinking and saying things similar to the parents that I work with that relate to these on and off days. Things like, what do you mean you can't do that? You just did it yesterday. Of course you can do it. Or having this thought that you're being manipulated, right? That it's, here they go again. they're just trying to get away with not doing what I've asked them because they did it yesterday. They could do it today if they wanted to, and they're choosing not to. All of that feels terrible as a parent. The worry that you're being manipulated, the confusion about why you're seeing this inconsistent performance. If any of that resonates, I want to assure you that you are certainly not alone. And that is because what you've experienced is a very common behavior, common set of characteristics amongst kids and teens living with brain-based differences. And that is having on and off days. In all the work that I've done with parents, just like you, over the last decade, all of them, again, parents of kids with all types of brain-based differences, there are a handful of lagging cognitive skills that I've just come to believe are universal, meaning I don't know that I've ever worked with a parent. I certainly can't remember one or have one that comes to mind whose child or teen or young adult didn't experience these specific lagging skills to one degree or another. And one of those skills is on and off days. So if we think about cognitive skills, what our brain does for us every day without us even having to think about it, I think of these cognitive skills in buckets or categories. And this skill, on and off days, fits under attention and working memory. On and off days is when your child or your teen has inconsistent performance in their behavior and their abilities. So I'll give you a few examples about what this could look like. This could be inconsistent performance with attending school or being able to do their homework. So maybe they're doing pretty well attending school, getting their homework done for several weeks or even months, and then they just can't do it. But that's not typically how we as parents experience it. Understandably, we usually experience it as our child or teen just not wanting to do it. It could look like your child learning things in school. Let's take an example, math facts. So they learn their math facts and they're cruising right through. They're showing that they have it down. And then the next week, it's as if they never learned it in the first place. On and off days could apply to daily living skills, things like personal hygiene. So their ability to get through those seemingly easy and basic and routine morning tasks that they have to do before getting out the door in the morning. And you've been working on it with them for years, and they're now independent or nearly independent. And one day they just can't do it without your full support again. Or maybe it's your teenager, right, who for months now has been attending to their hygiene, their personal hygiene, and you're thrilled about this because it's been lots of reteaching, lots of circling back, lots of conversations. And then one day it just takes a nosedive and they're not keeping up with it anymore. They are unable to manage it, but that's not how we see it. It looks to us through a behavioral lens like they just don't care anymore. And maybe they're even telling you that. Leave me alone. It's my choice. I don't care. There can be on and off days in relation to their emotional regulation skills and being able to tolerate big and small frustrations that life inevitably throws their way, or disappointments, and their ability to rise and fall with those disappointments or those stressors, and be able to just kind of go with the flow of life. And maybe you've seen their ability to manage those frustrations, those disappointments, improve slowly over time. And you are so thrilled about that and so encouraged by that growth. But then all of a sudden, it feels like they have the shortest fuse. And it feels like it really came out of nowhere, where these really minor, insignificant frustrations are causing big behavioral symptoms. Typically, with on and off days, it's something that as a parent, you know your child or teen has struggled with in the past. So it's not ever been something that's been easy for them, but it's gotten better over time. And you've seen growth and maturity, and maybe you felt like, oh, okay, we're finally past that, or we've reached this level of independence. Great, let's move on to the next thing. And then all of a sudden, there's this regression. They're back to not being able to do it. So that is what we would think of as inconsistent performance or an off day. And it's super confusing as a parent because you've seen them on their on days where they can do these things. And then, as I said, it feels like almost out of nowhere, you have this regression in their skills. But most of the time when this regression happens, we don't see it as that, right? We can be pretty reactive towards off days, again, understandably. And we often see it through a behavioral lens, which leads us to the conclusion that that behavior, that off day, is being done on purpose to manipulate or to just get the easy way out or just to be difficult for some unknown reason, right? If your child has a medical condition, for example, if they live with a neuroimmune condition, PANS or PANDAS, these on and off days can be really extreme. It's where your child is acting their age, they're taking on responsibilities that you would expect for their chronological age, they're as independent as you would expect them to be, but then their illness flares up. And with it comes a drastic regression in skills, both concrete skills, like being able to get dressed in the morning or brush their own teeth, but also those cognitive skills, like the ability to inhibit their impulses, their ability to wait before they have a demand met and tolerate that frustration and that waiting, or to be able to tolerate something not going as they expected to. It can be really severe and drastic in terms of that pendulum swing. Similarly, for kids with seizure disorders, I've had parents say to me, we recognized that he was having an off day and his behavior symptoms were pretty intense, but we were seeing it through a behavioral lens. It wasn't until later that we realized he was having seizures that we just didn't know, right? So I wanted to highlight that specifically as it relates to on and off days. But even for kids or teens that have a more consistent brain-based condition, like my teenage daughter, that doesn't wax and wane so severely, the difference in on and off days is still enough to throw us off. And it's still enough to make us really question whether that behavior that we're seeing on the off day is being done to us on purpose to manipulate or to get away with something. So the first thing I want to really encourage you to try and do is rest confidently into the fact that inconsistent performance or inconsistent abilities to do things big and small, these on and off days that we've been talking about, it is a brain thing. And it's very, very common in kids and teens with all different types of brain-based differences. There are some common reasons why our kids experience off days. And sometimes we know, and sometimes we don't. And I don't know that that is the biggest issue or the most important piece of this, and I'll come back to that later. But I did want to highlight a few reasons why we know kids can have off days. So extreme cognitive fatigue or having an empty cognitive fuel tank. That's where their brain is working really, really hard all day and has not had enough time to just rest and heal from those demands of their day or week, or maybe even the cumulative demands from that month. That's why we see kids who may start out strong at the beginning of the school year, where they can go to school the whole day. Maybe they get through the day without even having any behavioral symptoms, and they've been able to string together several on days or maybe even on weeks in a row. So they're not given any accommodations because nobody is seeing that they are barely surviving their day, working harder than any other student in this case around them. But as the year progresses, that cognitive load and fatigue builds. And what they were able to do at the beginning of the school year, it's just not possible anymore. They need more support. And so those on days turn into off days, one after another, right? That inconsistent performance really starts to show itself. So that's super confusing to the adults in this school environment because this student started off the school year so strong. And from that behavioral lens, it looks like now they just don't care anymore. They're choosing not to do it, whatever it is. when in fact, they are having an off day because their brain is tired. It's a result of that brain fatigue. So that's just one common reason why we might see on and off days. But again, what I really want you to hear and take away from this episode is that it is a common lagging cognitive skill. It is a brain thing. The other thing that I want to be sure you hear is that in my experience, one of the quickest paths to burnout for parents like you and I is not easing into the acceptance that our kids and teens will have on and off days and that it is a part of their brain-based differences. I have seen many parents fight against this truth for a long time. And they spend so much of their precious and limited energy trying to figure out, is this behavior on purpose or is it an off day? Because if it's on purpose, then I'm going to hold my ground. I'm going to dig my heels in. I'm going to become more inflexible. I'm going to make sure that they do not get away with whatever it is they're doing or not doing. Alternatively, if this parent decides that it's an off day, then they give themselves permission to be more flexible, more empathetic, to adjust demands or expectations for that day or that week or maybe even that month. And they provide more support to their child or their teen. If that sounds familiar, I totally get it. There is no shame or blame. I think it's fair to say we've all gotten stuck at times in this place of trying to figure out if it's an off day or whether the behavior is on purpose. What I want to encourage you to think about is where one path leads versus the other. So if you follow the Brain First Parenting path and assume it's an off day, and you give yourself full permission to adjust your expectations for that day, and you provide more accommodations and more support, and you make the choice to lead with empathy, and you lean into connection with your child, I promise you, you will not end up in a worse place than if you follow the other path. That other path, of course, is a behavioral lens. It assumes that the behavior is being done on purpose to manipulate or take advantage of you. And if you follow that path, we all know where that leads. It is a dead end to frustration and escalated behaviors. If you follow that Brain First Parenting path that I described, you will not lose your parental authority, I promise you. And in fact, if you somehow decide that your child or your teen actually wasn't having an off day, okay, now that you have that connection at the foundation of your relationship with them, you have relationship, you can have that conversation with them. And that conversation can help them build their skills even further. All right, if you're listening to this and it resonates with you, but you're still feeling some internal resistance to this idea of fully leaning in to the fact that your child or teen is going to have some days where you see this regression in skills, this inconsistent performance, and that it is a brain thing, that's okay. I want you to give yourself lots of self-compassion. And I'd also encourage you to get curious about why that resistance is there. We are all human, and we all come into parenting with our deeply held beliefs and our values about what is good and right and appropriate, what it means to be a good parent. And my guess is that that internal resistance that you may be feeling has something to do with your deeply held beliefs and your values about what it means to be a good parent and hold boundaries and teach responsibility and raise capable and responsible young people who will grow into independent adults. Maybe you have an underlying fear about over-accommodating or creating too much dependency. That's okay. That's why we always talk about the parent experience with this Brain First Parenting approach, because it is so essential, it is so important, and it matters. It's something that we should be consistently coming back to. What is our experience? Where am I experiencing the internal resistance, and why? And thinking about all of that with lots of self-compassion as you reflect. It's hard to parent a child who has inconsistent performance in all the ways we've talked about. It's hard, it's disorienting, it's confusing, and also It's super common. It's a super common symptom for kids like yours and mine. And it's my hope, because it is so common, my hope for you is that over time you can find some peace in that fact, right? So that it doesn't feel so hard. You're not pushing up against it, fighting against it all the time. It doesn't feel so heavy. As I wrap up this episode, I want to encourage you to be mindful of on and off days in the coming week. Just look for it, notice it, right? As it relates to your child or teen. When you have a moment or a day or a week where your child or your teen shows that inconsistent performance in some way, are you able to take a step back and assume that it's a brain thing that you're seeing and follow that path and that line of thinking and see where it leads you and note where it leads you? I am so excited and so grateful to be on this journey with you. And I am sending you lots of encouragement as you work so hard to support your complex child. Hey, if you found today's episode helpful in any way, I'd like to ask a quick favor of you, and that is that you take just a moment to share this episode on Instagram or Facebook, the two places where I hang out most. By doing this, you will help me reach more parents who are really needing reassurance that they are not alone and that there is information out there that can help their family heal. Thanks so much in joining me in my efforts to reach them and support them. It is so appreciated.